Welcome to .org. .org is a platform for buying and selling anything, anywhere, anytime. So, making money the really easy way. In fact, it's easier than falling asleep.
It's swift, secure, and easy. .org, transforming lives.
Let me start the hearing by saying this hearing should not be controversial. It really shouldn't be. This is something I think we all should want to restore the confidence in our election system. A week ago, when I gave notice to this hearing, there were more standing issues and court cases than there are today. But even though courts have handed down decisions and the Electoral College has awarded Joe Biden 306 electoral votes, a large percentage of the American public does not believe the November election results are legitimate. This is not a sustainable state of affairs in our democratic republic. There are many reasons for this high level of skepticism. It starts with today's climate of hyperpartisanship, which was only exacerbated by the persistent efforts to delegitimize the results of the 2016 election. The corrupt investigation and media coverage of the Russian collusion hoax reduced faith in our institutions, and the ongoing suppression and censorship of conservative perspective by biased media and social media adds fuel to the flames. Senator Grassley's and my investigation and report on the conflicts of interest and foreign financial entanglements of the Biden family is just one example of how media suppression can and does affect the outcome of an election. It is both amazing and galling that all of a sudden, post-election, this has become a news story and a scandal worthy of investigation. With less than a month left in my chairmanship of this committee, the examination of irregularities in the 2020 election will obviously be my last investigation and last hearing as chairman. But oversight into election security should continue into the next Congress because we must restore confidence in the integrity of our voting system. In the time we had, it was impossible to fully identify and examine every allegation. But many of these irregularities raise legitimate concerns, and they do need to be taken seriously. So here's a brief summary of what we did learn. And a lot of this should provide American public comfort in the integrity of our election system. First, multiple controls do exist to help ensure election integrity. Voter registration rolls and election logs for both in-person and absentee vote balloting are used to verify eligible voters and help prevent fraudulent voting. But it is not a perfect system, as we will hear in testimony today. We have increased the percentage of votes using paper ballots from 82% in 2016 to 95% in 2020, and a lot of that had to do with the efforts of CISA and Chris Krebs, recognizing that was a vulnerability in our system, not having that audit trail. So this is a significant improvement in providing a backup audit trail, but only if full or statistically valid recounts occur. There is no uniform method of transmission. It is not fully automated, and thousands of human beings are involved in the process. So human error does occur, but that is what paper backups and post-election canvassing is designed to catch. Today we will hear testimony on how election laws in some cases were not enforced, and how fraudulent voting did occur, as it always does. The question that follows is whether the level of fraud would alter the outcome of the election. This year, in dozens of court cases, through the certification process in each state, and by the Electoral College vote, the conclusion has collectively been reached that it would not. However, lax enforcement, denying effective bipartisan observation of the complete election process, and failure to be fully transparent or conduct reasonable audits has led to heightened suspicion. On March 7, 2018, it was reported that Senators Klobuchar and Shaheen asked, quote, major vendors of U.S. voting equipment whether they had allowed Russian entities to scrutinize their software, saying the practice could allow Moscow to hack into American election infrastructure. Then last year, on March 26, 2019, Senators Klobuchar, Warner, Reid, and Ranking Member Peters wrote, quote, the integrity of our elections remain under serious threat. Our nation's intelligence agencies continue to raise the alarm that foreign adversaries are actively trying to undermine our system of democracy and will target the 2020 elections as they did in 2016 and 2018 elections. And then on December 6, 2019, Senators Warren, Klobuchar, Wyden, and Congressman Pocan wrote, quote, we are particularly concerned that secretive and trouble-plagued companies owned by private equity firms and responsible for manufacturing and maintaining voting machines and other election administration equipment, quote, have long skimped on security in favor of convenience, leaving voting systems across the country prone to security problems. Now again, those were 3 letters from Democrat members of Congress. Now, maybe I missed it, but I don't recall the media or anyone else accusing these 8 congressional Democrats of indulging in, quote, quackery and conspiracy theories, unquote, or their letters of being a, quote, ridiculous charade, unquote, as Senator Schumer did when he used those exact same words attacking me in this hearing on the Senate floor. The fact that our last 2 presidential elections have not been accepted as legitimate by large percentages of the American public is a serious problem that threatens our republic. I do not say that lightly. This hearing is part of what should be ongoing congressional oversight that is meant to transparently address that serious problem.
You know, Mr. Chairman, if we have learned anything over the past few years, it's that we cannot take our democracy for granted. And I appreciate that even the chairman's rhetoric around this election has evolved over the last 24 hours. But let me be clear, deciding to move forward with this hearing is still dangerous. Now, I understand the chairman's desire to ensure our elections run smoothly, and I agree that we need to restore faith and trust in our election process. But I'm concerned that today's hearing will do more harm than good by confusing a few anecdotes about human error with the insidious claims the president has aired.
Again, I don't see anything dangerous about evaluating information, about doing legitimate congressional oversight. Nothing dangerous about that whatsoever. As I said in my last hearing, closed-mindedness is a real problem for a lot of the issues we face today. And the reason I want to enter this in this article in the record, I really hope people read it because it really speaks to an awful lot that I covered in my opening statement of why we're in this unsustainable state of affairs in this country, where after 2016, 4 years of resistance, failing to recognize, refusing to recognize the legitimacy of that election, and here we are again. This is not sustainable.
Over a century ago, the Supreme Court of the United States wrote this: the right to vote is a fundamental political right, preservative of all rights. And over our 231 years as a constitutional democracy, the story of our American experiment is in no small part a story of expansion and inclusion. Voter fraud drives honest citizens out of the democratic process and breeds distrust of our form of government. So how do we achieve honesty and integrity in elections? It's a challenge for the reason the chairman suggested: decentralization. We have national elections, but we do not have a nationalized election with one set of rules. As we'll be exploring in this hearing, the presidential election 2020, with its unprecedented feature of the use of mail-in ballots, has given rise to a number of questions that deserve to be answered.
The 2020 general election has underscored the vital importance of comprehensive oversight of voting technology and the companies who manufacture these systems. That oversight is an overlapping process of voluntary vote federal standards, state certification or approval, and local logic and accuracy testing prior to each election. Let me be clear. The EAC has confidence in the voting systems we certify and in the state and local election administrators who ran the election. First and foremost, that's due to the process the voting system manufacturers must undergo to receive federal certification.
The absentee voting in Wisconsin is treated quite differently, I believe, than other parts of the country. Let me read for you what the legislature found. It's in our statutes. It says that the legislature finds that the privilege of voting by absentee ballot must be carefully regulated to prevent the potential for fraud or abuse, to prevent overzealous solicitation of absent electors who may prefer not to participate in an election, to prevent undue influence on an absent elector to vote for or against a candidate. As a consequence, our laws are strictly construed, and even more so, let me read again from the law, results which do not comply with those regulations, quote, may not be included in the certified result of any election. Uniquely, we are able to examine actual envelopes that contain the ballots that are submitted by absentee voters. This allowed us to identify by person, by address, by ward. It's not conspiracy. The real names are in the record. And here's what we found. We found that there were incomplete and altered certificates. These are the certificates on the front of the envelopes that have to be exactly done correctly under our law. If not, those results may not be counted. How many of those? More than 3,000 of those identified by person were nonetheless counted, even though they are clearly invalid under the law. A second category, initials of clerks are placed on all of those envelopes. Why? Because the clerk identifies it having been properly received and identification is provided. That's the check in advance of the election. What did we find? More than 2,000 of those ballots in Dane and Milwaukee County had no initials at all, but nonetheless, they got counted. We also have special laws in Wisconsin with regard to voting in advance. We do not allow advance voting. We allow in-person and other voting as absentees. So anything before Election Day is under our absentee rules. What did the city of Madison do? They created a system where people could arrive at a park, hand in their ballots in envelopes 5 weeks before the election. They also created boxes, no controls at all, just boxes on corners that you could throw the ballot in. No attempt at all. And our statutes explicitly say there are only 2 ways to submit an absentee ballot: in person or delivery to the clerk's office. That's it. Nothing else is allowed. And yet the city of Madison, we had 17,271 ballots in this category that we identify. There are tens of thousands more because they commingled the ballots afterwards, so we couldn't identify each one that may have been properly cast. Then we have an interesting category called indefinitely confined. These are people which the statute, I read from the statute, by age, physical illness, or infirmity, or are disabled indefinitely. Among those claiming this status, so they don't have to provide any identification, among those claiming this status is one of the electors for Joe Biden. Who said, I can't get to the polls. We have poll workers who claimed it. We have people who went to protests, people who had weddings, people who had vacations, all claimed this status. I can't get to the polls, so they were able to vote without identification. There were 28,395 people we explicitly identified. 3 million people properly voted in the state of Wisconsin. More than 200,000 identified during this recount did not, but those votes got counted, and our statute says they should not have been. That, in our view, is a taint on our election in Wisconsin. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Troupas. And I believe Joe Biden won our state by about 20,000 votes.
Correct.
And you're talking about over 200,000 that were outside of our law that probably, if the law would have been followed, probably shouldn't have been counted.
Correct.
Should not have been accepted, shouldn't have been put in the ballot pool. And of course, the remedy is not particularly pleasing, which is one of the reasons the decision went its way.
Actions by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which undermined the controls inherent in Act 77 of 2019. The controls which were undermined included, on September 17th, 2020, the Supreme Court unilaterally extended the deadline for mail-in ballots to be received to 3 days after the election. They mandated that the ballots mailed without a postmark would be presumed to be received, and allowed the use of drop boxes for collection votes. And then on October 23rd, 2020, upon a petition from the Secretary of the Commonwealth, ruled that mail-in ballots need not authenticate signature for the mail-in ballots, thereby treating in-person and mail-in voters dissimilarly and eliminating a critical safeguard against a potential election fraud. Candidly, without knowing the answer to these questions, and due to the magnitude of the potential discrepancies and closeness to the elections, the results of the 2020 presidential election in Pennsylvania would just be completely difficult, if not impossible, to determine with conclusiveness.
This year, thousands upon thousands of Nevada voters had their voices canceled out by election fraud and invalid ballots. Here's how it happened. On August 3rd, 2020, after a rushed special session, Nevada legislators made drastic changes to the state's election law by adopting a bill known as AB 4. The election was inevitably riddled with fraud, and our hotline never stopped ringing. While the media and Democrats accused us of making it all up, our team began chasing down every lead. Our evidence came both from data scientists and from brave whistleblowers. Here's what we found. Over 42,000 people voted more than once. Our experts were able to make this determination by reviewing the list of actual voters and comparing it to other voters with the same name, address, and date of birth. This method was also able to catch people using different variations of their first name, such as William and Bill, and individuals who were registered both under a married name and a maiden name. At least 1,500 dead people are recorded as voting, as shown by comparing the list of male voters with the Social Security death records. More than 19,000 people voted even though they didn't live in Nevada. This does not include military voters or students. These voters were identified by comparing the list of voters with the U.S. Postal Service's National Change of Address database, among other sources. About 8,000 people voted from non-existent addresses. Here we cross-reference voters with the Coding Accuracy Support System, which allowed our experts to identify undeliverable addresses. Over 15,000 votes were cast from commercial or vacant addresses. Our experts found these voters by analyzing official U.S. Postal Service records that flag non-residential addresses and addresses vacant for more than 90 days. Incredibly, almost 4,000 non-citizens also voted, as determined by comparing official DMV records of non-citizens to the list of actual voters in the 2020 election. The list goes on. All in all, our experts identified 130,000 unique instances of voter fraud in Nevada. But the actual number is almost certainly higher. Our data scientists made these calculations not by estimations or statistical sampling, but by analyzing and comparing the list of actual voters with other lists, most of which are publicly available.
The nation should also thank the many federal, state, and local government election partners for the crucial work that's been done that would give our citizens the confidence that their vote was counted as cast. We should also be taking a victory lap, celebrating a job well done. While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election. Of that, I have no doubt. Chairman.
The decision by the Wisconsin Supreme Court obviously went against you. Maybe not totally against you. I did read the rather scathing dissent from the chief judge. Can you just describe exactly what, in summary fashion, what the Wisconsin Supreme Court's decision was based on your lawsuit.
So the Wisconsin Supreme Court was urged by the Biden campaign not to address any substantive issues. And that's exactly what happened. The Biden campaign argued to the court that we're not going to talk about any of the substantive things. We're not even going to dispute the things I just brought up to you. But instead, you just shouldn't hear them because a state agency, the Wisconsin Election Commission, had authorized some of these activities. And candidly, as Chief Justice Rogansack and other dissenters held, one, the claims are substantive, they are substantial, and they needed to be addressed. Second, the Wisconsin Election Commission is a bureaucratic organization explicitly that the same court just 4 months ago said has no meaning. It is not law. It is some advice given, and that the statute should control. We were disappointed, not so much in the decision, but in the fact that the decision itself is premised not on an analysis of the law, nor the analysis of the claims. It's an idea that we should not have a transparent system, that you're not going to address these things. And that's what they argued. And it's really a sad day, frankly, when the opposition doesn't argue we're wrong. It argues we shouldn't be heard. That's a strange thing in a state that is so transparent as ours.
They simply tried to use technicalities and limiting our evidence, limiting the amount of witnesses we could bring forward, saying that we couldn't introduce any live testimony, but only 15 depositions, only use 15 depositions to show 130,000 instances of voter fraud. And then when it went to the Supreme Court of Nevada, they gave us 2 hours to brief the issues before immediately coming down with a decision. A record was over 8,000 pages long. We were never fully considered by those courts.
There was fraud in this election. I don't have any doubt about that. There was fraud. We just don't know the extent, and we don't know what the remedy would be when identified.
The trick about elections is that, you're not so much trying to convince the winner they won, it's the loser that they lost, and you need willing participants on both sides. And I think we've got to get back to that point. Otherwise, we're going to have a very difficult time going forward, maintaining confidence in this American experiment.
I just have to talk about Russian disinformation because the people peddling it are not on my side of the aisle. Senior Democrat leaders, including Ranking Member Peters, were involved in a process of creating a false intelligence product that was supposedly classified. They leaked to the media that accused Senator Grassley, the President Pro Tem of the Senate, and myself of accepting and disseminating Russian disinformation from Andrei Derkach. I'd never heard of the person until they brought it up. That's where the disinformation is coming. That's where the false information, the lies, the false allegations. I can't sit by here and listen to this and say that this is not disinformation, this hearing today. This is getting information we have to take a look at to restore confidence in our election integrity. We're not going to be able to just move on without bringing up these irregularities, examining them, and providing an explanation and see where there really are problems so we can correct it moving forward. Senator Paul.
Mr. Chairman, I got to respond to that. I mean, you're saying I'm putting out information. Well, one, it had nothing to do with this report.
You lied repeatedly.
I did not.
You lied repeatedly in the press that I was spreading Russian disinformation, and that was an outright lie, and I told you to stop lying, and you continue to do it.
Mr. Chairman, this is not about airing your grievances. I don't know what rabbit hole you're running down.
You
right
talked
now.
about Russian disinformation.
Down rabbit holes.
Senator Paul.
This is simply not what we're dealing with.
Paul.
But, Mr. Chairman, you can't make these
Judge
false
Starr.
allegations and then dropping it there. That is why this
Senator Paul.
needs to return back
Judge
to
Starr,
Senator Paul.
partisan things. This is terrible what you're doing to this committee and all the great work that you talked about.
It is what you have done to this committee.
It is not
falsely
the case.
accusing the chairman of spreading disinformation. Nothing could have been further from the truth, and you're spouting it again, which is why I had to respond.
Come
Senator
on.
Paul.
Mr. Chairman,
Judge Starr.
this is outrageous.
Judge Starr, It's been alleged that 60 courts have refused to hear these cases. Therefore, there was no fraud in the election. When you see the 60 court cases rejected, do you think that's a conclusion by our court system that there is no fraud, or do you think that the court cases were primarily rejected for procedural reasons?
Right, Senator Paul, it is my understanding that the vast majority of these cases were rejected for rightly stated procedural reasons, as opposed to merits-based or substantive-based evaluations. We are a United States of America, and if something bad happens in one state that ends up having an effect on another state, we have such respect for our states as sovereign entities within our union that the argument is, I think, quite reasonable, and I think others think it's quite reasonable that at least the matter should have been heard.
I think courts have historically been reticent to get involved in elections and to look at fraud, but moving forward, we've got to change the rules or reevaluate our state rules in order that this doesn't happen again. But we can't just say it didn't happen. We can't just say, oh, 4,000 people voted in Nevada that were non-citizens, and we're just going to ignore it. We're going to sweep it under the rug and say, oh, the courts have decided the facts. The courts have not decided the facts. The courts never looked at the facts. The courts don't like elections, and so they stayed out of it by finding an excuse, standing or otherwise, to stay out of it. But the fraud happened. The election in many ways was stolen, and the only way it'll be fixed is by, in the future, reinforcing the laws.
We watched what happened in 2016 and what the American people thought and saw, and so we engaged with hearings, we looked at the issues, and determined, do things need to change? Much of the work that's gone on the last several years to be able to get paper ballots into states happened because this Congress engaged on an issue where we saw an obvious problem. And so we distributed federal dollars, assistance, and a constant drumbeat to say these states have got to fix the areas where they don't have paper ballots, and we have the potential for problems. That was the question. Is there a potential for a problem? The answer was yes, there's a potential, and we ought to fix that. Now, amazingly, after this election, all kinds of issues have come up and said there are potentials for problem, and everyone seems to be saying, move on. The only reason I can think that that would be different was because the election outcome seemed to be different. And one side is now saying, let's just move on and ignore this.
Once a good hard look at these cases is examined, an honest look, if we do that, there should be charges brought.
I firmly believe that this Protect 2020 effort, working with our partners in the federal government, whether it was in the intelligence community or the Department of Defense, was the single best representation of a unified government effort. Everybody got it. There were no turf wars. There was no parochialism. Everybody was on the same page. So we were defending democracy. We're going to have to move past this somehow. You know, I've said before that democracy, yeah, we survived this, I think. It was strong enough to survive, but democracy in general is fragile. It requires commitment, follow through on both sides.
I value the paper backups, I value the controls, but they're only as good as they're actually used, and they only provide confidence to the extent that it's a transparent process. So
the very sad fact is that we were denied access to almost anything meaningful that would allow us to verify.
Can you be specific?
Absolutely, Senator. Let's talk about the paper backups on the electronic machines. We were denied any access to those except for from one machine in the entire state of Nevada. We were denied that access. That I wish I could have quoted Mr. Krebs when we were fighting our discovery fights at the in Nevada, saying how important it was to get access to these. We brought forensic experts all the way to Nevada, people that could have discovered this information, people that could have told us what happened with these machines, and we weren't allowed near them. We weren't allowed any forensic audit of it. Nothing that could have given us any transparency, because transparency is not political. That's what we've talked about here. That's what we were denied in Nevada. You got to pick one. It's either open source, and we exactly know the way that these machines are counting the votes, or you have to go back to a verifiable system to make sure that the results that are being reported are the results that we get from actual voters, because that is where democracy breaks down. That is really the fear that we have of losing democracy, is when it's not the people's votes that are being counted, but fraud that's being counted. And we can't just pretend that the emperor has any clothes if he doesn't. We can't pretend that we have a clean election when there's evidence to the contrary. And the way that we get that is through transparency. And we were denied that in Nevada at every single turn.
This system is, we only have confidence in it if it's completely transparent and somebody who's challenging results has access to the information. The paper ballot backup can have their forensic experts take a look at the computer systems. And that wasn't afforded. I'm just asking, does that concern you?
I think that there are multiple controls in place throughout the system. If there's a legal mechanism at the back end that allows for independent third-party auditing.
But that's the problem. The legal system didn't allow for the transparency. Okay, you can talk about all these controls up front, but then in the end, where there are affidavits signed and people are making charges, when you can't obtain the evidence to actually try it in court, and your evidence is denied in court, do you understand how that frustrates people? And that's the problem. That's why there's suspicions, because this was not, in so many cases that we've heard about, a transparent process. But with that,
and everyone is hearing these anecdotes, and they're saying, well, aren't there control mechanisms in place? And so the issue with decentralization is you will continue to have these varieties and vagaries unless and until there is some enormous reforms in state government.
I think it would absolutely go miles to make sure that people were confident in the results of the election if we put in simple methods to make sure that the people who vote are who they purport to be, that one person only gets one vote, that the way that the ballots are counted leads to an accurate total. These things shouldn't be partisan. These things should be exactly what we do to protect our republic and make it so that people know that the results are accurate.
When we pose these matters to courts, we expect them to address them. When they don't, it undermines the integrity of our system. That's what's going on here. The frustration that you hear, even in good Democrat circles, is if the courts don't address these, who's going to? Aren't they the ultimate arbiters? If you don't do this inquiry, there really isn't going to be any analysis, and there isn't going to be an opportunity to get the very integrity that we all want. I mean, as I said, as a former judge, and this is a serious matter to me, and no one suggested at any point in the process that the allegations in Wisconsin are anything but serious and substantive and documented. And yet a court takes the Biden line and says, we're just not going to talk about it. And that's just wrong, and that's the reason, one of the reasons, people don't trust this outcome.
You have to have the information. This is not a dangerous hearing. This is incredibly important and crucial hearing.
Yes, sir. So, when you come into federal office, you pledge the oath to uphold and defend the Constitution from threats, foreign and domestic, and that's what we did. The focus of the statement, the joint statement, was security. It was secure. I think terms have been conflated here. Alleging that we were speaking to the fraud aspect. We absolutely were not. We were talking about security, hacking, manipulation of these machines. That was the thrust of the statement.
These are normal folks living normal lives who firmly believe that they have been disenfranchised. And to listen to the mainstream press and quite a few voices in this building tell them after 4 years of nonstop Russia hoax, it was a hoax. It was based on, the whole Russia nonsense was based on, we now know, lies from a Russian spy. The Steele dossier was based on a Russian spy. After 4 years of that, being told that the last election was fake and that Donald Trump wasn't really elected and that Russia intervened, after 4 years of that, now these same people are told, you just sit down and shut up. If you have any concerns about election integrity, you're a nutcase. You should shut up. Well, I tell you what, 74 million Americans are not going to shut up, and telling them that their views don't matter and that their concerns don't matter and they should just be quiet is not a recipe for success in this country. It's not a recipe for the unity that I hear now the other side is suddenly so interested in after years of trying to delegitimize President Donald Trump. So suffice it to say, I'm not too keen on lectures about how Missourians and others who voted for President Trump and now have some concerns about fraud, about integrity, about compliance with the law should just be quiet, and that they are somehow not patriotic if they raise these questions. I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable.
We're now talking about the unprecedented use of mail-in ballots. And their concern and their warning of former President Carter and Secretary of State Baker is that this is a mechanism or a platform for fraud and abuse. Be careful about it. Have safeguards in place. And I think that's at the bottom what some of these concerns are. How did dead people vote, accepting that allegation from Nevada? It is because of inadequate safeguards. The dead person didn't walk into the into the voting booth and vote. Someone voted for him or her. We have to have those safeguards in place, and that's what the commission was saying and issuing that fervent warning that it may get worse in a deeply divided country. So many states have best practices. We heard from Senator Portman about Ohio. Other states have these safeguards in place. Let's put safeguards in place, but one of them is let's eliminate practices that are so prone to fraud and abuse.
I like to think of this hearing as a demonstration that freedom to obtain and distribute information to the public. There's nothing dangerous about that. It is essential to our freedom. It's essential to our country, to our democratic republic, and is essential if we're going to restore confidence in this election system we have. We have to do this. We can't ignore the problem. The first step in solving any problem is admitting you have one and then dealing with it honestly, gathering the information. This hearing, as all my hearings have been a problem-solving process, first gathering the information. That's what we're trying to do here today.
At some point in time, we have to say, enough's enough. It's time to turn the page, and let's get about our nation's work.
I would say the main thing of this hearing is the fact that we need to have confidence in the integrity of our election. And we have to recognize the reality that right now, and quite honestly for the last 4 years, that hasn't existed. 2016, illegitimate result, resistant. You remember the famous tweet by Mark Zaid. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but something like, coups begun, impeachment will follow. That's what we've been living with 4 years. Different election, different result, different side. And the reality is people have concerns.
And I would pray that all those sacrifices made by the millions upon millions of people who served in our military to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against enemies, foreign and domestic, would be upheld as well on our shores, so we can ensure the same type of election integrity that we're asking for with transparent, fair, and accurate results can be assured within the United States. We know 44 of the states apparently went off without a hitch, so we have 6 states that we're dealing with. That's a pretty good track record, but unfortunately, when you consider the fact that the 4 of the states were that razor-thin margin close, the results of the election could have been in question. I concur, Senator, that most of the results have already been looked at from a challenge from a legal perspective, so it's probably a moot point for the current election, but I pray that the Senate will take up this battle standard and say we need to really reaffirm to make sure that the people have the faith and confidence in our election systems. I try to live by a triangle of faith. The faith is to believe is to have faith, and to have faith is to have trust. Whenever that trust triangle is broken, we will have difficulties and discord will follow. And I pray to God that every person listening to this testimony hears your words and says, let's have a peaceful resolution of all of these concerns that we have so we can get on with business as usual.
That people need to be treated with respect. I understand as an election administrator that often we are doing our job and we don't believe anybody needs to be watching the process. But some of the reports, it gets back to sort of this, the way we treat each other in this country, and if a poll watcher is observing the process, they have a right to be there. They observe the process. They need to be respectful of the election official. There were some significant reports that process was was interfered with.
Former Director Krebs, again, I appreciate your service to the country. I appreciate what you accomplished. I mean, as you know, I've acknowledged that repeatedly. I mean, I think the fact that we've gone from 82 to 95% paper backup, that's all great stuff. And I certainly appreciate you coming here and testifying today. So I'll let you, with any closing comments, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson. I'm going to keep this short because I think this is a historic hearing for me. This may be the longest hearing that I've had in this chamber. So I will try to wrap this one up quickly.
We cannot ignore voter fraud away. We can't just wish it away. Unfortunately, that's what the media these past weeks has been trying to do. In the most biased reporting I think I've ever seen, where even in headlines, they try to claim that the evidence I've seen with my own eyes is somehow not there. We can't wish it away. It is just simply right now a gaslighting attempt on America. This is real. This happened. We have to address it.
I would tell you we are at that seminal moment today relative to the sanctity of our elections that have probably been building since 1787. But now is the time for all of us to sit back and say we need to not vilify one another. And Senator, I applaud you for your willingness to get to an open, transparent basis here. But we need to sit down and do these types of hearings. As much as the Band-Aid being pulled off may be painful, we need to expose these concerns so that people, the 150 million people who voted, can once again feel with confidence that the election process works and their vote mattered.
I'm honored to represent the president. I was honored to get the call, but I'm not naive. One of the reasons I was called is because virtually every major law firm in this country and in this city refused to represent the president, not because of the lack of merit of his claims. We've certainly demonstrated there's merit, but because of the cancel culture, because of the environment that has been created by the left that has intimidated lawyers. So they can't be here. They're not here because, from the giant law firms, precisely because they were ordered by their management committees and others that you cannot take those cases. And the reason you cannot take those cases is because our clients or the Democrat Party or the incoming administration will remember that, and they will hold it against you. That's a sad state of affairs. One of the reasons people are doubting the election is because the other side here, the Biden campaign's primary defense is don't hear the evidence. Don't let them litigate. Don't have a court rule on the substance. Let's be honest, that's what's going on. And so that's why the public doesn't trust this outcome. It's not about the president. It's about what the other side is doing to intimidate and force people not to listen, not to take the evidence. We had 4,000 people volunteer from everywhere in the country to come to Wisconsin to participate in the process. We had over 2,500 volunteers over a 10-day period take their own time, their own money, come from all over the country, and they came and they attended the recount and they participated. And I said to the recount on the floor, the Democrats and the Republicans, I said, if you are losing your faith in the greatness of this republic, look at this recount. Look at the number of people from the Trump campaign and from the Biden campaign that would give of their time and effort to be here, in that case in Madison, Wisconsin. It was humbling, truly humbling.
Today's hearing has been a tribute to the Constitution. I love Senator Carper's comments about December 7, 1787, and the idea to form a more perfect union. And this hearing has been in that spirit. In politics, if you don't have integrity, you don't have anything. And what this hearing is trying to do is to how can we, in fact, promote not just confidence in government, but how can we, in fact, promote the integrity and honesty, which is at the bedrock of the kind of government in whom we can trust. So
this hearing is not dangerous. What would be dangerous is not discussing this openly and frankly with transparency. This is a problem that we have to acknowledge and recognize and solve together. And we're only going to do that with information. So I'm soliciting information. Okay, this is only part of the process. There was oversight before this hearing. There needs to be oversight after this in the next Congress. Hopefully I can work with Senator Carper, who I think we all recognize has done a pretty good job of outreach here and some pretty bipartisan words here. So I'm hoping that's how we can move forward. Because I truly think as Americans we share the same goal. We all want a safe, prosperous, secure country, state, community. That's what we want. We want to be able to raise our children in safety and freedom. And the way it works in this country is through participation in the democratic process. So I think everybody in this panel wants to make sure that we have good participation. We encourage citizens to participate. We also want every legitimate vote to count. But we should be every bit in favor of making sure that every vote is legitimate. And that's what this is all about.